Hi guys, my name's Doug. Welcome to My Messy Garage. Today's video we're going to be working on my 2019 Ski-Doo Expedition Super Wide. It is fall here in northwestern Ontario and trying real hard to become winter, as you can probably see my breath reflecting in the lights here. And it's time to get the snow machine ready to go for the winter. First step in that is changing the oil and putting some grease into the suspension. Follow along, hopefully you enjoy this one. Thanks a lot for watching. First thing you want to do before we start doing this is we want to warm everything up good. Before I took any of the covers off, I let the engine run for about 10 minutes, get all the fluids warmed up so that they flow easily for removal, and gives us a chance to kind of see what it's like in a running state. So we're going to go over it now with a flashlight, just look it over, see if there's anything too major. I've pulled a couple of twigs and a little bit of bulrush remnants from down around stuff. You know, it doesn't have to be perfect, it's just going to get full again the way we ride. Everything looks really nice and clean in here. I'm very happy with how this works. This machine's got 5,800 kilometers on it. I'm going to guess that's in the 4,000 4,200 mile range, and really I've had pretty much no problems with it. I'm very happy with the Expedition with the 900 Ace. Easy on gas, good machine. I'm not seeing any parts that are falling off here. Finding a few twigs and whatnot sitting in a few of the hidden cavities, but that's not surprising. This is a snow machine that's designed for use in the backcountry, and that's how I use it. 24-inch wide track provides excellent flotation. Thing stays up on top of the snow really well. And I'm not seeing anything that really worries me at this point. The standard way of changing the oil in one of these 900 Ace Expeditions is to drain the oil out of the bottom. There's a small hole in the belly pan down at the very center of the engine, and that's the drain plug for removing the oil. However, I've got a couple of Ski-Doos that I work on, and I've decided that using that method of extracting the oil, which is basically to pull it back up through the dipstick hole, works very well on this. I tried it last year, got almost every drop of oil out of this thing. It was very easy to do an oil change, so I think we're going to repeat that again this year. What I've got here is a Holt Industries from Harbor Freight. And what this is a suction pot, which is used for extracting oil. And if you wanted to, you could also use it to push fresh oil back in. Drain the oil out of it using this, dump the oil, clean everything out inside, put your fresh oil to the same level as the dirty oil that you pulled out, and then you could use the pressure to push it back into the engine. I'm not going to bother doing that. I'll just dump fresh oil in, but we'll definitely use it to remove the oil. We'll go down into the bottom of the engine, and we'll just pump this up. It pulls a vacuum. You don't have to continuously pump it. You'll see it start to pull the oil out of the line. And just pump on this until we start to feel that we're not getting a full stroke out of the pump. We just let it run for 30 seconds or so, and then we'll put a little more vacuum to it. And I'm going to pause it here. I'll bring you back when we're done sucking. There's no sense watching oil flowing down a tube for 5 minutes. So you can kind of hear, just I hope you can hear, that it's starting to gurgle. We'll just kind of feel around with the hose in the bottom of the crankcase. See if we can find any more oil down there. We don't appear to be. So that, I don't know, took 3 minutes maybe. And now we're drained. I purchased the oil change kit from my local Ski-Doo dealer. 0W40 is the oil that we use in this thing. And now it's just a matter of dumping some fresh stuff in. Now, please take to the comments and flame me for putting the oil in before I've changed the filter. But with this design, the filter is kind of up high and it's separate. So we can put the fresh oil in before we change the filter. And we'll get the filter on the other side before we start the engine, of course. But we can put the fresh stuff in now. You got to take it cool pouring the oil down the opening. If you get going too fast, it will overflow the funnel and make a big mess. And the advantage to using the sucker as opposed to draining it out the belly pan is that we don't make a big mess. So we don't want to make a big mess by overfilling the funnel. I've dumped 2 liters of oil in. I'm going to take the dipstick and run it in just to be sure. When you're checking the oil on these, run the dipstick till it's in and seated. And it's showing that it's full, but I have a hard time believing that. I think we're just picking up some oil that's on the inside of the drain tube. The fresh oil that we're putting in is a little on the cold side, so we'll give it a minute, let the oil drain down in, and we'll check it again. Okay, I've checked the oil level again, and we are full. I've put 2 liters into the engine. Probably, I'm going to say 2.5 would be absolutely everything. So maybe we missed a little bit using the suction tube. But I've only got 1,400 kilometers on this oil, so it's not like it's in dire need of a change. So this is our oil filter that we're going to be using. It's a cartridge style. You have to take a little take a cover off over on the other side, and we've got an O-ring. These washers are for the drain plugs, and this will fit down into the cartridge, and then the cover goes back on. Before we head over there though, while we're all set up with lights on this side, we're going to check the belt. You'll notice that there's grooves on the outside of this belt, and basically you want the bottom of the groove to be flush with the outer lip of the clutch. And you'll notice that this one is just about perfect. I seem to recall mid-season last year I touched up the belt tension on this because it was a fairly new belt, and therefore we don't need to make any adjustments. If we did need to make adjustments, we back off the lock nut here, and there's a wrench in the toolkit that allows us to turn the adjuster nut here on the outside and then snug it back down. I find it works well to put the transmission in neutral. This is a utility sled, so it has a neutral in the transmission. And we just let it run for a while, and it does a good job of seating itself in, and then we can verify that we're good. But since we don't need to make any adjustments, we won't make any adjustments. One problem with the 900 Ace in the Expedition is that this is the oil filter housing right here. And unfortunately, you cannot get it off with the exhaust in place. So what we end up having to do, there's 2 springs here, another one that kind of hold, another couple that kind of hold it in place, and we need to pull the muffler back out, and we need to move the main exhaust pipe just a little bit out of the way, give everything a good wipe down to get the fuzzies out of there, and then we'll pull that top off. So I've got, this is called a sailor's knife, and it's got a nice awl on it for doing rope work. But it works out fairly well to hook underneath the head of the spring, and we just give it a little pull. We just give it a little pull. We just give it a little pull, and the spring comes off. These springs do have a fairly stout pressure to them. The proper way to do this is to use a spring puller, and I purchased one specifically for doing oil changes on this snow machine. But I don't remember what I did with it. It's in my messy garage somewhere. We've got the muffler basically loose. There's a tab goes off the bottom and goes into a rubber mount. And that's all that's holding it in place. So here's the muffler. This is the tab that was holding everything in place. This is where the main input goes. You can see the hooks where the springs grab. Spring grabs here on this side and over here at the bottom. Gives us an opportunity to pull some of these twigs and fluffies out of here. Obviously, we don't really want a bunch of flammable material in around the base of the muffler. Now that we've got the muffler extracted, we can get out the reservoir that the oil filter sits in. Let me grab a rag and wipe some of that fluff off of there. So we pulled the donut off of the exhaust so that it doesn't get dropped and damaged. We don't drop the flashlight on the ground. And our bolts that hold the cover in place are 8mm head. Obviously they're not 8mm bolts. And as you can see, they're essentially standard bolt. Nothing fancy. Pop the cover off, wipe everything down, pull the O-ring off because we're going to replace it with a new one. Put the O-ring, the new O-ring on. We want to be careful that we don't end up getting the new O-ring all twisted. We want it to kind of go on without having any roll from rolling it down over the edge, because then it's going to want to walk back out. Also, a little bit of oil on the O-rings, probably not a bad idea. Help it slip down into the housing when we reassemble. Pull the old filter out. Give it a look around the outside under the light and see if we see any shine. And I don't really see any part numbers in there, so I'm reasonably sure that that is going to be okay. And I will set this down in the paper towel so that it doesn't drip all over the floor. We've got our new filter. Again, just wet the rubber ever so slightly so that it slips down in place nicely. Drop it down, and there is a boss in the bottom of the cup that sticks up that the filter has to go down onto. We take our cover, line it back up with the bolt tabs, and then we push it down in place. And you don't want to draw the cover down with the bolts, because that is a recipe, if something's not quite right, to bust one of the ears off of this cover. And you'll notice that the bolts go back down into place finger tight, very little resistance. I'll use the extension kind of as a nut driver, just to get it down to the point where the ratchet will grab. A little bit of a challenge to get around the exhaust pipe from this angle, making it so that you guys can see what I'm doing. Not room for the extension under here. Lift up on the exhaust pipe, get the ratchet in, and snug up the last of the 3 bolts. That's got the oil filter changed. Some more of the garbage out from underneath the muffler. And now the muffler's ready to go back in. First step, put the donut back on. We've got to drop the exhaust outlet down into the opening in the chassis. We've got to get the tab back into its rubber mount and put the inlet to the muffler over top of the graphite donut, and then just kind of wiggle everything around a little bit and it will drop into place. Now for the hard part, reinstalling all of the springs. That's the easy one. The back two went on not too difficult, but this one at the front promises to be just a little bit of pain. So now, of course, we got the one last one. There's always got to be one that fights us. And one of the problems is that the tabs are not parallel to each other. They're kind of perpendicular, but the hooks on the springs are parallel. So not only have we got to pull it up in place, but we've also kind of got to put a 90-degree bend on it. And while I'm sure this would be a relatively easy thing to do with the proper spring tool, that I wish I could remember where it was, we'll get it. So close. Well, it took a little bit of colorful language, but I finally managed to get that on. It is a bit of a trick to get that front spring without a proper spring puller, because the tabs are 90 degrees to each other and the springs are designed to attach straight. But we got it. That is by far the hardest part about changing the oil on this machine, is putting those springs back on the muffler. And that's why I bought the proper puller and then promptly lost it. So one more thing that I've done every other year, but again, put a lot more miles on than I did this past winter. I've changed the gearbox oil. There's a drain plug down at the bottom here. It drains out through a hole in the running board into a drain pan underneath. Makes a bit of a mess, but it's not too bad. And then we dump 3/4 of a liter of gear oil. I actually have the oil, the appropriate synthetic gear oil. As you can see, $31.99. This is the right stuff to go in there, but I don't see that there's any need to put gear oil in here with only 1,400 kilometers on the machine since it was done last. So I think we're going to leave it there. So with that oil change being done, and we're going to leave the gearbox alone, I think it's time to fire it up and make sure that we get oil pressure. And I definitely heard the valves rattle a little bit with a lack of oil at first, and then the oil light went out and we've got oil pressure, so we're good. Let me take the flashlight and look around and see if we've got any leaks. Flashlight, shine it around in there. I don't see any indication of oil leaks. Everything looks good on the other side. I think we will call that a success. Thanks a lot for watching. Hopefully you got something from this. Appreciate you stopping by to check things out, and we'll see you in the next mess.